Hi, I'm John Schreiber. For 18 seasons, the New Jersey Performing Arts Center has been the state's premier home to world-class and community-centered performances. We pride ourselves on presenting something for everyone. That's why we're proud to partner with the CAUCUS Educational Corporation to produce the new Congress, U.S. Senators Menendez and Booker, a conversation with Steve Adubato at NJPAC. We're pleased to welcome them and you to the Arts Center.
Funding for the new Congress, U.S. Senators Menendez and Booker. A conversation with Steve Adubato at NJPAC has been provided by Barnabas Health Life is Better Healthy, Johnson & Johnson, NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, the New Jersey Education Association, Health Republic Insurance of New Jersey, PSE&G, committed to improving New Jersey's economy and strengthening its communities, and by the law firm of GIBBONS, P.C.
Welcome to New Jersey Performing Arts Center. I'm Steve Adubato. This is a program called The New Congress, a conversation with United States Senators Bob Menendez and Cory Booker. We're with a live audience, and you can tell from the applause. Together with our partners in public broadcasting, WNET, NJTV, FiOS, and New Jersey Advanced Media, and so many others. Let's get right to it. We're taping this program on the 5th of December, the Eric Garner, no verdict, if you will, or a decision not to indict, the Michael Brown case before. Both of you have spoken out publicly. What is the role, Senator Menendez, of the federal government now that these two decisions have been made?
Well, as has been announced, it's appropriate for the Department of Justice to conduct their own independent views now that the states have made their own decisions, and we look forward to that, to hear what they conclude. I think it's tragic at the end of the day that two lives were lost, particularly when there are two individuals, both unarmed, at the end of the day. And something is wrong when, for the alleged crime of selling cigarettes that were untaxed, you lose your life. Something is dramatically wrong about that. And so, in addition to the investigations of the Justice Department, which is fitting and appropriate, the conversation that President Obama has talked about leading across the country, and the conversation that my colleague, Senator Booker, is leading in the Senate on this issue is, I think, incredibly important, because the reason that we have protests is to create change. And that change is about having a system of justice in which every citizen, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or the happenstance of where they were born or what station of life they were born into, can believe what it says over the Supreme Court's mantle: equal justice under law. And that's what we have to ultimately drive towards, and not just think about these as isolated incidents, but as a reality and a challenge that we have as a nation to create a more perfect union.
Senator Booker.
Can I just say real quick what a privilege it is to sit here, three guys from Jersey on our Jersey public broadcasting station. It's such an important institution in our state, and the commitment that they've made to stay in New Jersey is pretty extraordinary. And I also want to say, just secondly, being very new in the Senate, this has been an incredible 12 months for me, being a United States Senator, but to be a senator with Bob Menendez has been an extraordinary experience. And I know these are the big issues of the day, and I definitely have a lot to say on this one, but I just want to say that when I say I feel privileged to be with Senator Menendez is because every single day we're fighting Jersey's fights. Earlier today, we scored a big victory, thanks to leadership that you were doing far before I got into the Senate on the Sandy issues. He and I met with Administrator Fugate, head of FEMA. So many New Jersey residents weren't getting justice, transparency, support, all the way to the issue we were just talking about, where you were really guiding me, mentoring me, about how to fight a truck safety issue for our highways. Cory, have you thought about doing this? And so this has been an extraordinary year for me to really be in the Senate with one of New Jersey's champions. And I just want to let folks know how the extensive gratitude I feel to be on the stage with Senator Menendez, with you, a Jersey boy, and before a nice Jersey audience. It's a point of pride for me.
That deserves applause.
So look, this should be an issue that should anguish all of Americans. And I'm not necessarily talking about the particulars of each of these individual cases. And I say cases because you mentioned Ferguson, Staten Island, but there's been Cleveland. There's a lot of other issues that are sort of flashing up to the public's attention right now. But we have a nation that has these incredible ideals that are very special in the globe, and we pride ourselves on being a nation of equality, of fairness, and justice. But when you begin to look at the numbers and of what really goes on within our criminal legal system, you see that we really don't yet have a justice system that provides justice at the levels that we want it. And this is something I've been struggling with for years. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why I chose to run for the United States Senate, because there's so many things that we could, should, and must do on the federal level to address a justice system or a legal system that's not doing that. And just the examples I want to give is that we know fundamentally that minorities are treated differently in the criminal justice system. The easiest example of that is arrests for marijuana.
Right.
There is no difference between drug pot usage. In fact, the last 3 presidents admitted to smoking marijuana. One may not have inhaled, but the last.
You still believe that? We'll leave that alone.
We'll leave that alone. But the reality is African Americans are almost 4 times more likely to be arrested, even though there's no differences in usage of marijuana. Blacks and Latinos get, for the same crimes, will get longer sentences, more likely to get the mandatory minimums. And there is a pervasive understanding in this country by large populations that they're not going to get a fair shake when it comes to this broken system. And so we have to understand that right now, as we sit here tonight,
right,
there are thousands of Americans, coast to coast, doing a constructive, creative protest around these issues and the urgency with which to change them in our country.
Senator Booker and Senator Menendez, so many people on NJ.com, as well as on FiOS, one of our other partners, through social media, because our partners, people ask questions through many different social media sources. They kept asking, what can the federal government do? Now that these indictments have not happened, what is the appropriate role of the federal government? Because I think a lot of people, and these are what people were saying on NJ.com, on FiOS, and other places, so the federal government's going to come in, civil rights case. What realistically can the feds do right now, Senator?
Well, depending on their decision of the facts as they deduce them in a civil rights case, they might bring federal charges. That's one possibility.
What does that mean?
Well, they might view that, and there's a pretty high standard to have to be met, but they might view that in individual cases, the actions of the officer or officers involved rose to a level that in fact violated federal statutes and therefore could be criminally prosecuted under federal law. There is a review about police departments across the country and the nature of how they ultimately act with their citizens. There is a view going on about how do we train police departments in this country? How do we look at something that I found tremendously successful when I was a mayor in a real significant way, which was community policing, not just the cop on the beat, but a cop who had the confidence of the people that he was protecting. Because if police departments, and look, police departments have a tough job, and I think overwhelmingly our officers do a good job, but if police departments at the end of the day cannot have the faith and confidence of the very people that they are there to protect, that's a problem. So how do we work at creating that bond? These are all elements that the federal government can participate in helping communities across the country, part through their resources, part through the federal COPS program, part through the Department of Justice guidelines, part through the investigation of the Department of Justice.
But actually in our audience tonight, one of the people in our audience is the mayor of the great city of Newark, Ras Baraka, who, and if I'm wrong on this, Mayor, you'll tell me because you never hold back. He argued, others have argued, that body cameras for police officers, you actually did an interview we had today right here at NJPAC. He said it was absolutely essential to do that. Should they be mandated, Senator? Body cameras for police officers so that police officers are protected and citizens are protected, because that level of trust is gone in the eyes of many.
Yeah, well, the data, first of all, it's almost a no-brainer, and that's why I'm so...
That's a no-brainer.
Well, it's a no-brainer that all the data shows from departments that have them that complaints against police officers go way down. You're actually, the police departments, many of the officers resisted in the beginning, but saw they were such an asset for the police officers as well as for the safety community and as well as another layer of accountability. But I don't want to keep, small little strategies are important. Doing these things are critical and urgent.
What should we do?
There has to be a broad-based reform of our criminal justice system at every single level, from the policing level all the way to through the sentencing courts, what happens in our prisons, all the way back to what happens when people are coming back into society. We've skewed so dramatically off the rails that a nation now that has 4 to 5% of the globe's population is now imprisoning, and we're paying for it, trillions of our taxpayer dollars, billions of our tax dollars here in New Jersey, when we should be investing in schools, universities, roads, is incarcerating 25% of the globe's imprisoned people. Now, that's bad enough, and 70+% of them are nonviolent offenders. But then when you start looking at who is getting arrested, you start to see that poor folks and minorities are dramatically much more likely to be in prison. And a lot of this has happened just since the 1970s. Our prison population has exploded 10 times alone since the 1970s because of this drug war. And the last thing to say is, so what happens to that kid that gets arrested that is more likely to be searched, to be surveilled, to be arrested, what are the collateral consequences of a 17 or 18-year-old kid getting arrested for a marijuana or a nonviolent drug offense? What are the collateral, what do we do to that young person? Well, we say that, okay, now you've got a felony conviction, you can't get a Pell Grant, you can't get jobs.
Can't go to college.
Can't go to college, jobs, food stamps. We basically strip you away from it and make it hard. So you get stuck in this almost a caste-like reality where you cannot integrate back in. And so we've created this since we have a policing and judicial system, a legal system that looks so much more at minorities. Please understand, we now have more African Americans. And by the way, Latino youth, it's the same thing. If you're a Latino boy, by the time you're in your mid-20s, about 44% will have been arrested. African American young men, you see the same thing. So we now are reached this perverse point in our history where there are more African Americans in this country under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850.
Can we shift gears? Even though there's so much more to talk about in terms of police-minority relations, the role of the federal government. We will see what Eric Holder does. We will see what the Department of Justice does. But Senator, you have been outspoken. I saw you on Meet the Press. Immigration, I saw you talking about that. You said that you believe that the president did absolutely the right thing by signing that executive order. How many millions of Americans now are protected who weren't protected before that?
Close to 5 million.
Some said, I saw them, social media, and others said, how could Bob Menendez say that if, in fact, the president said many times before that, I would never sign an executive order doing that. You should only go to Congress. And then he did that, and some people said, how could Bob Menendez defend him? But you did. Go ahead.
How much time do we have?
Why was the president right?
Look, he was right for a variety of reasons. Number one, as a result of the president's executive order, more Border Patrol will go to the southern border, more felons will be deported, more people will pay taxes like the rest of us do, and more families will stay united. And those are values and goals that I think we all want to see. Now, this president did what 11 other presidents, going back to President Eisenhower, for the last 60 years on 39 different occasions have done in using their executive powers specifically on immigration-related issues, including former Presidents Reagan and the first President Bush, who gave a status to 1.5 million undocumented people in the country at the time, which was a very significant number of the undocumented population in the country. So this protest about this is Barack, this is ridiculous. There is long history and precedent. Now, why is it as a policy right? As a policy, these are people who had to be here at least 5 years,
right,
who have to have a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, legal permanent resident child, who will have to come forth and go through a criminal, register with the government, go through a criminal background check, assuming they pass that background check, will then be allowed to work, give a work permit, and they will have to pay taxes. and they will have only a temporary status. This does not give them a pathway to citizenship or permanent residency. So it is part of what could be done. Now, when the president said, I don't have the power to do what people keep referring to, that was about the 11 million and giving all 11 million undocumented people in this country both status and a pathway. He doesn't have that power. He didn't exercise that power. He was judicious in what he did do, which is not the total solution. And that's why what we did in the Senate, where we passed a comprehensive, bipartisan immigration reform bill that takes care of security at our borders, that promotes our economy, and that still preserves our nation as a nation of immigrants, passed 68 to 32. We don't get 68 votes in the United States Senate on contentious issues. For a year and a half, it has languished in the House of Representatives without a single vote. And I am convinced, Steve, if the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and we still have time as we are recording the show, if the Speaker of the House of Representatives put it on the floor of the House, it would pass with bipartisan votes.
Why do you
and
think
we
it's
would
not
have
up?
a reform system.
Why do you think John Boehner doesn't put it up?
Because he has a small Tea Party group, but all in his caucus, that are rebellious to the notion that, in fact, we could find a way to protect our borders, to create a pathway for people to make themselves right with the law, which would take them well over a decade, that the Congressional Budget Office, the independent, nonpartisan scoring division of everything that we want to do in the Congress, said that it would increase the GDP of the country by 5.4% in the first 20 years, that it would create nearly $1 trillion of deficit reduction, that it would create 1.1 million jobs over the course of the first 10 years, and that it would raise the wages of all Americans. Now, what do we ever do in the Congress of the United States that reduces the deficit, grows the GDP, creates jobs, all in a single package? That's what the Congressional Budget Office said.
Well, not only
A simple yes would be fine.
yes.
Wow.
I'm just saying. I'm just,
You must have some unique power. I've never seen him do that before.
Pleased with you. By the way, do you have any idea how historic it is? Our county executives in the House, Joe D., you know this. Is it not a fact that it's rare, you will never admit this, that it is rare that United States senators in the state of New Jersey work this closely together? Look at the silence I get right now. It isn't.
No, we have a history of working together.
Yeah, sure. But
we do.
The cooperation we see between the two of you is amazing. Isn't it a beautiful thing?
Yeah, well, this is what I just want to say.
They just ducked it. Trust me.
I want to
this.
say just something about Senator Menendez. I just finished, obviously, a campaign up and down the state where people did talk about.
Was that a close one?
The number one issue was about jobs, which was to see something scored by the CBO that would create so much jobs.
Congressional Budget Office.
Congressional Budget Office would create so much jobs, it would reduce our deficit, that would have such a massive charge to our economy. But the thing about working together, I also heard that everybody was tired of gridlock in Washington. And here was a bill, and Senator Menendez doesn't get enough credit, that he was part of that gang of 8 that actually hammered together a bipartisan compromise and led it through the Senate. It's a testimony to what's possible. And if we just focus, I almost wish we could drop partisan label for a while and just talk about what will grow America's economy, create more jobs. And it's doable.
Dropping the labels?
I don't think dropping the labels is doable, but I think that this country needs to get back to the business of America growing our economy again. And this, what Senator Menendez led, is historic in the ability to bring the Senate together, to get it done, get it passed, and do something that would charge our economy.
Stay on this. What happens when the Democrats lose control for powerful people like Bob Menendez and Cory Booker, who would have more power if the Democrats won? What do they do after they go into the minority? Meaning, how will you go from being the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to being the ranking member on the Democratic side? How will you conduct yourself differently in this way? All those who have seen you as the chairperson, what can they expect from you no longer as a chairperson, but being so knowledgeable about foreign relation issues?
Well, Steve, first of all, I've served in the majority and the minority in both houses of the majority, of course. But I've served in the majority and the minority in both houses of the Congress. And I have succeeded in promoting the interests of New Jersey and national views that I have in both houses, in both iterations, majority and minority. Now, what I've done in the last couple of years, and Cory joined me in this last year, in the Senate is look, the way to get anything done in the Senate because of its rules is you have to seek a bipartisan approach. So how did I get major autism legislation into law in a state that it's so important when we have the highest rate of autism in the nation? Because I worked with the ranking Republican, the senior Republican on the Health, Education, and Labor Committee from Montana, who generally he and I don't have many other things in common. But we worked on this because we found common cause and got it signed into law by the president.
That's the exception, though.
We did the same thing on homeowners flood insurance. I heard from New Jerseyans, as Cory did when he started running for the Senate in his appointed year, about how New Jerseyans were still facing the challenges of Superstorm Sandy. They survived the wind and the rain and the storm surge, but now they were dealing with a man-made disaster, which was skyrocketing flood insurance that they couldn't afford and needed in order to be able to still keep their mortgages. So the bottom line is we went to work and we put a bipartisan coalition that stopped the rate shock and ultimately drove a piece of legislation that the president signed into law. And I could go on. My point is this.
So the gridlock's not as bad as we think it is?
Well, you know, I hate to say it, but the essence of a good story for the press is conflict. Success.
Hold on. You think that the gridlock...
Success. No, I'm not saying that the press is responsible for gridlock.
You think
I am saying that elements like this don't get equal time.
The success.
The successes don't get equal time. It's when there's conflict and when you have the challenges, sometimes out of a very principled view, and sometimes out of a partisan view, that get covered more.
When the government shuts down.
So my point, by the way, just to summarize, my point is that whether in the majority or the minority, I dealt with minority members in order to have success. I expect that we will have the same set of opportunities when we turn into the minority in January. And the other thing, as it relates to being the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and going to the ranking member, which just basically means the senior Democrat, under the rules that I established with my ranking Republican, in order for me to have a hearing, I had to get his concurrence. In order for me to put a nominee up for a vote, I had to get his concurrence. And that's why, in the midst of the partisanship, every major piece of legislation out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee passed on broad bipartisan supports, and hundreds of nominees passed, except for 3, with strong bipartisan votes. And I would expect that the same set of rules that I will have a say as to what hearings go forward and what nominees go forward.
So, Senator Booker, as I listened to your colleague, and a lot of the questions that came in across the board through social media did ask this question on so many platforms, as well as on Twitter and Facebook. The level of perceived gridlock is so great, and the perception of Congress so low, tie the two together. Do you think that your colleague is correct in saying that we in the media love the conflict, we love the failure, and we disproportionately focus on that?
I don't think you're saying anything novel or original there. Obviously,
so you guys aren't as bad as we think you are.
Well, look, look. So, you know,
so when the government shuts down.
But it's no. First of all, every single day, and this is what surprised me, because when you're a mayor, you can put points on the board every single day, and I see this. I still live in Newark. I see Mayor Baraka doing this every single day. There's a lot that's turned into a park. There's a road that gets paved.
Right.
And I was worried going to the Senate that I wouldn't have that feeling. But what I've been able to do with Senator Menendez, and often with Republicans, is do things that never get into the public eye. Let me give you just a good example of this. We seem to, as a nation, come up with the money to send people off to war, but when they come home, when our veterans come home, we often don't seem to have the resources to do what we should do by them. And I was very happy to see this consensus build, again, Senator Menendez being one of the leaders in that we had to do something to deal with the crisis with veteran care. At the same time that was going on, I found out that there was traumatic brain injury centers here in New Jersey that were doing incredible work for New Jersey residents that were going to sunset and close. I got on the phone right away, not with a Democratic colleague, with a Republican colleague. We were able to get the funding back into the bill and preserve it. Lots of veterans in New Jersey are going to benefit from that. Those are examples that aren't unique or rare. They go on every single day. And the authority of Congress, this is something that's very important.
A lot of success stories.
No, but this is a very important point to educate folks about the Senate who may not know this. Another big part of your power in the Senate isn't just passing legislation. It's like what we did with Administrator Fugate. It's oversight of the federal departments. And so, for example, in Cumberland County, one of the poorest counties there was, I had learned when I was mayor, when we were trying to deal with the foreclosure crisis here, that there were lots of programs that we were eligible for, but often didn't have the access into them. And so one of the things we were able to do, Senator Menendez's office and mine, was to get hundreds of young of families in Cumberland County into mortgage stabilization programs. So we're able to do a lot more than often is seen, because that's not going to make the headlines.
I got it. Before we talk about education, there's a question on NJ.com about Common Core, which we'll talk about. But I just want to say this. For all those who believe that there are a whole bunch of folks on the Republican side of the aisle, for those who believe that there are a whole bunch of folks who will do anything to not have the president succeed, you think that's an accurate assessment?
Is there a universe of members in the Congress of the United States that would do anything they can to not have the president succeed? I do believe that.
If that's true,
it starts off with the Republican leader who, for the last 2 years, said my #1 priority is to make Barack Obama a one-term president.
But how is that bipartisan cooperation?
Well, that isn't, but that's at that leadership level. But at member levels, if you're willing to reach out to the other side, as I've done in the Foreign Relations Committee, which is why we've passed major legislation on Iran, on North Korea, on OAS reform, and a whole host of other things, or on autism, or on rate insurance for the whole question of flooding, you can achieve these. Cory, in a very, it's tough to do anything when you first come in an appointed period. I went through that when I first came to the Senate. This success, he underplays it, this success that he had on the question of helping those injured veterans who were going to find themselves without a wherewithal for rehabilitation, is not only here in New Jersey, it's going to have national reach. So those are the things that we work at every day to make happen.
Member relations.
Are there moments of conflict? Of course there are.
Let's do this, Senator. Let's do this because we're halfway through.
Steve, if I can, because it's almost when we have these conversations, it's always them in Congress. Please understand that we're in a tough point, and there's a contributing element to it to all of us. Let me give you the example.
Can I ask you to hold that? We'll pick it up on the other end.
Sure.
I promise we'll do this. This is we're at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. This is a show called The New Congress, a conversation with United States Senator Bob Menendez and United States Senator Cory Booker. Stay with us. We're right back right after this. You can applaud because you're a live audience.
To see our programs online, visit us at steveadubato.org. If you would like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD, and follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato.
Let's pick up the conversation. At the end of the first segment, Senator, I wanted to give you a chance to follow up the point you wanted to say about the president. Go ahead.
Well, it's just this attitude that we as Americans have to take responsibility for the government that we have right now and understand when we play a role in that. And the point I was going to make about the president, which is a shocking point to me, when you have the president giving a State of the Union address, which is not just an address for America. Obviously, it's principally for that, but the eyes of the world, from China to Russia to India, are watching that speech. And you have an individual heckle the president, something I never heard.
In Congress?
In Congress, heckle the president.
Do you know who it was?
What's that? The point I want to make is, do I know who it is? No, I don't remember the guy's name.
Does it matter who it was?
It doesn't matter. What matters is that at that point, instead of that person being sanctioned, censured, or what have you, the next day they turn around and raise a lot of money from the American public. They almost get rewarded for that bad behavior. What do you mean?
You said they got rewarded. Who is they?
The individuals that are often behaving badly are doing so because they get from the currency of politics, whether it's fundraising or popularity or what have you, that gets rewarded by us as folks. And so what I constantly say is that we've got to get engaged in our politics in a way that what we want from our political elected officials, working together, bringing people together, is what actually rewarded. And those people that are adding to that gridlock, adding to this idea that I'm not going to work with the president simply because he's a different party, or that I believe in a binary world, if he wins, I loses, which is not the idea of this great interdependent nation. And so our politics has to start to begin to evolve. In order to do that, to wait for just the politicians to do that, really divorces you from responsibility into creating that outcome.
I got a question on NJ.com on Common Core. How do you feel about Common Core and PARC, P-A-R-C-C? Right, you know what that is?
It's a test.
Oh, look at you. You would do well on that. How do you think these high-stakes tests are actually helping our children? How do you feel about these standardized tests?
Well, first of all, I think we've gone too far in one direction, which is this high-stakes testing that's being used in a punitive manner. It is, I think, from all the teachers I talk to, in many ways undermining their ability to give a well-rounded education, and we've got to find the right balance. And so to create an environment where the tests instill fear as opposed to helping to give feedback loops for accountability, we have to do better than that. And I think that many teachers and administrators now feel overly burdened by them and feel like they're spending a lot of time teaching to the test. And so in general, when it comes to this testing stake, we've got to figure out a better balance and to get back to the kind of holistic testing that makes, by the way, our country very unique. That we are a nation that focuses on things that give kids a whole well-rounded experience. So they're not just automatons, but they're inventors, they're innovators, they're artists, they're poets, and making a full contribution to our society.
Senator Menendez, let me ask you this from your perch. You understand this in a way that a lot of us don't. You interact with world leaders in a way that a lot of us cannot imagine. What do you say about the criticism of the president that he is a weakened leader around this country? He is perceived to be a weak leader around this world, excuse me. And then when it comes to the issue of ISIS, dealing with ISIS, he has not nearly been strong enough. You say?
Well, look, I say that Barack Obama brought bin Laden to justice when others only talked about it. I say that, in fact, when Assad was using chemical weapons against his people, Barack Obama, with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, passing on a bipartisan basis, where I took John McCain, one of the most hawkish members of the Senate, and Barbara Boxer, one of the most dovish members of the Senate, together to vote for an authorization for the use of military force to give the president the wherewithal, as he was headed at that time to the G20 summit, to convince Putin, Assad's benefactor, that, hey, either get rid of the chemical weapons or I'm going to use that authorization for the use of military force. And we ended up ending chemical weapons in
Has it been tough enough?
Syria. Look, you know, this thing about toughness.
Well, you know, when you draw the line in the sand thing, you know?
Well, the goal is not to be Rambo. The goal at the end of the day is to achieve your strategic interests, both in the national interest and security of the United States and those of your allies. Now, you know, I think that there have been moments of great success. There are other times in which, for example, in the committee, we have been more forward-leaning. We passed
more forward-leaning.
More forward-leaning, meaning that we were ready to take a step forward to arm the vetted Syrian rebels a year and a half ago, which now the administration promotes.
Should they have done it?
We led the way on sanctions on Iran, which brought Iran to the negotiating table. I authored those sanctions.
Why didn't the White House move faster on that?
Well, because, of course, you know, there is a role between the executive and the legislative branch, right? I mean, in the executive branch, he's also in the midst of creating alliances with other countries to get them to work with us in common cause. But sometimes the impetus that the legislative branch can create can assist the executive branch as they're dealing with global powers to say, my Congress, this is a democracy, is moving in this direction. I happen to share their views, but they may be moving a little ahead of me. At the end of the day, this is where we're going to be. And ultimately, to the president's credit, he worked in taking the sanctions that Congress passed and which he signed, and then creating a global coalition that moved forward to give it bite. So to give the president credit, at the end of the day, he has taken some of these steps significantly. Now, there's times, I believe that Congress, the United States Senate that we serve in, is a separate, co-equal branch of government. That means, you know, I support the president when we are in common cause, and when we have a different view, I will pursue my different view, because the ultimate people that I am responsible for is to the people of the state of New Jersey who elect me, and I'll make my case as to how I see things and why I voted certain ways and what positions I took.
Just so I get this, just on ISIS before we leave it, complex issue. Hard to even figure out who they are, where they are at. You know, we're in New Jersey, what do we know? Do you believe the strategy that we understand the White House to be implementing to deal with ISIS is the best strategy?
Well, look, it'll be an evolving strategy.
Excuse me?
It'll be an evolving strategy.
Should we have, quote, boots on the ground?
Well, the bottom line is, I am neither a hawk nor a dove. In Afghanistan, I supported then President Bush, because that's where bin Laden and al-Qaeda, the perpetrators of September 11th, the reason we lost 700 New Jerseyans, the reason we lost 3,000 Americans, and I supported the use of force there. When it came to Iraq, I looked at the intelligence that was available to any member who took the time, and it came clear to me that there was no clear and present danger, no imminent threat, and no evidence of weapons of mass destruction, and I voted against it. Now, the question is not simply boots or no boots. The question is, if you can have the Iraqis, the Kurds, and moderate Syrian rebels be the ground forces to follow on the airstrikes, then that is a strategy, if in fact we can strengthen their abilities, that may very well work, which means that I don't have to send your son or daughter or my son and daughter to fight there when those who are in the midst of the challenge most immediately are willing to fight themselves. I'd rather test that first. And lastly, as it relates to ISIS itself, ISIS is a threat to the national interest and security of the United States. The reason that I am concerned about them, in addition to the barbarism that they have exhibited, is they don't yet have the operational capacity to create a September 11th-like attack. And what I want to ensure is that we strike at them in a way that doesn't ever let them get the operational capacity to create a September 11th-like attack.
Senator Booker, one of the audience members gave us a terrific question on the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Negativity and general ugliness will probably begin in the new Congress, that's positive, around the Affordable Care Act. What will you, Senator Booker, and Senator Menendez can answer as well, do to preserve the law's integrity, and how will you help congressional supporters of the law stand their ground to keep improving health reform?
Look, there's so much swirl around this, and you see polls are dramatically different if you say the Obamacare versus the Affordable Care Act.
Does it matter what you call it?
What should matter is the actual substance of the bill that has created a dramatically different reality for millions of Americans. And so I don't want to go back to a time where a family with a sick child couldn't get that child insurance and would face bankruptcy. I don't want to go back to a time where a woman had a pre-existing condition being a woman, and would often face, this is all true, would often face a far more expensive pathway to health insurance. I don't want to go back to a time that someone who is sick just can't get insurance, period, because no insurance company will allow them.
Because of a pre-existing condition?
Because of a pre-existing condition. I don't want to go back to a time when people who are working hard every day, playing by the rules, have no pathway towards health insurance, and then often end up getting their health insurance in the most expensive way to taxpayers, which is the emergency room. And so there's been incredible innovations that we've been able to make under this bill that are worth protecting and preserving, and Senator Menendez and I, for one, are going to fight tenaciously against any attempts to move us back to an America where, frankly, when you poll Republicans on these issues, they don't want to go back there either.
Any changes at all you'd make to improve it?
There are absolutely changes.
Could you name one change?
Yeah, I'll name one that's very important for the state of New Jersey, which is the medical device tax. One of the ways some of the aspects of it are being paid for, a line, is to tax medical devices. And for me, that is inhibiting a lot of New Jersey businesses and affecting a lot of New Jersey jobs. Nobody is saying that this can't be improved. If you look at a lot of the legislation that we have in this country, from Social Security to Medicaid, to the Constitution itself, they've been improved and evolved over time, and this is something that needs to have happen. But let's not let the rhetoric and the blanket condemnation undermine the progress that we've made as a nation that we need to defend and not go back.
Senator Menendez, let's talk Sandy recovery. So many people watching us right now down at the Jersey Shore in northern New Jersey. So many people still struggling, suffering, can't get back in their homes, or businesses can't open up again, struggling, trying to figure out how to navigate this very complex governmental system. Which part of it, forget about the blame game, let's play the accountability game. Which part is the federal government responsible for? Which part is the state government responsible for? And how the heck do we improve this situation 2 years plus after?
Well, You know, Steve, this has been my singular mission since the last 2 years, from working at the time with the late Senator Lautenberg to get $60 billion for the region at a time in which we were talking about fiscal cliff at the end of a congressional session, just as we're having similar to right now, where the Congress ends and a new Congress begins.
Sure.
Trying to make that all happen under those set of circumstances was enormous. And succeeding in the Senate only to be stalled in the House for a while, but ultimately succeeding in getting the $60 billion. And then dealing with the realities of how do we expedite this money, but make sure we don't have fraud in the process, right? And so I was one of those who accepted giving the federal money largely to the state to make determinations on how, in fact, subject to certain reviews,
Let the state do it.
would, well, let the state be the vehicle
Sure.
which people would get their resources.
How'd that work?
It was a mixed bag, to be perfectly honest with you. Some of it worked well, and some of it did not. Our beaches are restored, our boardwalks are restored, but there are 10,800 families in New Jersey who still are suffering and still haven't gotten back into their home. Despite all of this money coming, there's only about 40% of them that have actually signed a REM program. That's the program that was established through the federal money by the state to help people out who didn't have enough coverage. Only about 30% of those ultimately have actually received any money, and less than 2,000 people have actually rebuilt their homes. So we still, as we are speaking in December, 2 years afterwards, have so many families out. So I've tried to streamline this, I bought the Secretary of HUD before my committee, a subcommittee that I chair in the Banking Committee on Housing, to say, look, let's do these environmental and historical reviews up front, because the state was telling me, well, that's what's delaying it. So in the first year, in 2013, the state only did 450 reviews of these cases. As a result of my change in this year that we're in 2014, they did 8,000 reviews of the cases to move it forward. And by getting that review up front, now, had we not had a state contractor that was chosen by the state that ultimately blew the program in the first year and was paid a lot of money and had to be fired, we might have been further along. So it's a mixed bag.
But you've worked closely with Governor Christie on this, no?
Yeah, we've worked in a way that is bipartisan, but that doesn't mean that when the feds were wrong in terms of, you know, what's the standard, or when the state is wrong in terms of how it's executing on the resources we're bringing, that we don't hesitate to raise a question. And the other part that we fought on is then the flood maps came. And the flood maps were overly broad. And we succeeded on reducing the flood maps so that there were less zones that were legitimately a major flood area, because that meant how much flood insurance you had to pay. And finally, then we had the flood insurance issue, where we had rate shock. And that's the legislation I mentioned before that we passed. And Senator Booker came in at that time, was a big ally in our process, and now stopped the rate shock. And today, we got some tremendous news that we announced together by taking the FEMA administrator and saying, hey, it's unfair that insurance companies where people have paid 10, 20, 30 years lowball, purposely lowball the amount that they're going to give a policyholder, homeowner in our state, and that, by the way, some of these insurance companies took engineering reports and had them redone so that they could either deny claims or lower claims. And today, we got the type of information released that will give all of those policyholders a fighting chance.
A few seconds on this before we leave Sandy.
Oh, I just want to again, I think, first of all, Senator Menendez has been a phenomenal leader on this.
Do you disagree on anything?
We're going to have areas where we disagree, but New Jersey, no, let's just be clear. New Jersey needs its two senators to work in lockstep and on things that benefit our state, and to divide where we can, and I want to use the word conquer, but to fight on these issues. And this is a great example that, and I want to give credit to our two senators across the river. He's not exaggerating when he talks about the lion's share.
You're talking about Schumer and Gillibrand?
Yes. The lion's share, a significant amount of our time is spent to deal with the thousands of families in New Jersey, thousands of people in New Jersey that are still affecting this. But this is a great example where he and I are our ability to continue offices. And I'll just give you another example, because he's being modest on our achievements of today. Just even this idea that FEMA can miss their deadlines where residents are waiting for information, whatever. FEMA can miss that. Government can screw up and miss their deadlines. But families, God forbid they miss it by one day, then they're being denied claims. And to us, that was outrageous. And so today was the day that we got FEMA to agree to reopen all these hundreds of families that have been denied under those just because they missed a deadline, many times waiting for information from the government to allow them to go forward. So this is a constant fight. And it's why you need senators that have such a good working relationship.
Let's do this in the limited time we have left. So many people, not just in the audience, because we asked audience members if they had a question, but we also, again, got this on a whole range of social media platforms on the on NJ.com, on FiOS, and other places. The federal minimum wage. Also on the NJTV website as well, John, people ask us, how about this one? Inequality, income inequality. What is the role of the federal government in terms of dealing with income inequality? More specifically, what are the odds that the federal minimum wage will, in fact, be increased? The federal minimum wage right now is?
$7.25.
And the proposal that is that it goes up to $10?
Over a period of time.
Okay. What are the odds that that happens, number one? And then what are the larger implications in terms of what is the role of the federal government to deal with income inequality?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you know, in New Jersey, because of the state's efforts, it's $8.25, and as a result of the constitutional vote that was taken, it'll be $8.35 or something.
What do you think it should be?
Look, something is wrong when you have mothers who work full-time and are below the poverty level. Something's fundamentally wrong with that. We want to reward work, right? The way you reward work is to make it such that it can pay. There's a problem when the top 1% in the nation had an 86% increase in their income over the last 20 years, and everybody else, the other 99%, ultimately had about a 7 or 8% increase over the same period of time. So the bottom line is, one is we have to continue to have a growing economy. And after 6 years of private sector job growth, the lowest unemployment we've had in 6 years, as we record this today, tremendous job numbers that came out today. But the reality is that middle-class families and working families see their income stagnant. So you have all these great macroeconomic indicators, but in their lives, they are still challenged. And so the question is, how do we, minimum wage is just one element of that.
Does the federal government actually have a role in trying to change that income inequality?
On federal, you look on that, it's a question of how do you create an economy that grows, that gets more people to work, including, the long-term unemployed, which we need to see drop.
Right.
It is also about how do you reward work through the tax code, and I sit on the Senate Finance Committee. How do you also reward creating opportunities for people to save and to be able to get their kid through school? When you graduate to college today under a mountain of debt, yet we need the most highly educated generation of Americans we've ever had to be globally competitive. The government has an interest in helping families meet that challenge because of our own economic imperative.
Senator, you've talked a great deal about student debt. Jump in.
Well, look, we're in this distraught present again, where our country used to lead on all these indices. From social mobility, we used to be the best country in the world to be born poor. We're no longer the best country in the world. If you want to make it from poverty to middle class, better to be born in England, in Canada, in Germany. All of these things are becoming stacked against middle class and poor families, just continue to go up and up and up. Our competitor nations are keeping the cost of college low. Germany, 4% of median income to go to college. Canada, about 6%. America, 52%, 52% median income to go to college. And so when you see, and then you understand, and this is where, again, and I just really want to applaud Senator Menendez on the Finance Committee, especially because when you see the policies that are being pushed by some, you begin to scratch your head and say, why are we...
For example?
Let's take for this simple point. In America, it's unconscionable to me that New Jersey residents right now, there are many of them, who have skyrocketed student debt. I've done this in rooms with 30 and 40-year-olds who are still carrying college debt, and many of them are paying 5% interest, 7% interest, 9% interest, 11% interest, because you can refinance your car loan, your mortgage loan, but you can't refinance your college loan. And so you're stuck in this unconscionable interest rate given where the interest rates are right now. And so I just make simple thoughts. I have friends in businesses that because they're in a hedge fund or other business, they have something called carried interest, which means they pay a lower tax rate than their secretaries. That is what we call a tax expenditure. It is a way that we are trying to reward certain behavior. The idea there is that we're somehow incentivizing investment. Well,
what should the federal government do to change it?
Well, what I'm saying is what's going to drive our economy more in the long run? Shifting that tax break there to a federal government right now that makes billions of dollars off the backs of our students, because the student loan program, many Americans don't know this, is a profit center for the government. And so, to me, there's simple policy choices we have to make as a society, because I believe what's going to drive our economy further forward is not giving tax breaks like carried interest to certain portions of our population, but giving opportunities for people to refinance their loans and get educated, because the 21st century knowledge-based economy, what's going to drive our economy forward, what's going to make America great, is that. And right now, people don't realize this, we've fallen from the #1 country in the globe for college-educated people. Percentage of your population going to college, we used to be #1. Now and if you're over 50 in this country, you're part of that cohort. But now for 20-somethings and 30-somethings in America, we're about number 12 now. And so this is hurting our economy dramatically, because we're making financial policy decisions that are benefiting the wrong groups and not doing the things that will drive our economy. And by the way, poverty is a harsh, I would even call it a violent reality for many people, because it keeps them from being contributors. It keeps them on the sidelines. An example I'll give you this.
Couple minutes, go ahead.
I just took 4 kids to the movie theater from Newark, 5 kids to see Penguins of Madagascar. And I met their mother.
You sat through the whole thing.
I did. I met their mother at IHOP here in Newark, making the tipped wage dramatically lower than the $7.25. And I asked her, what does she do? She's working double shifts. She lives in the West Ward Mare. And she told me the salary she was earning, the dreams she had for her 3 boys. She was caught in this trap that the harder she works, she's not climbing out of that trap. And I asked her, what's her dream for herself if she could get to college or to Essex County? She said, my dream is to be a social worker. Here's a woman that wanted to, in effect, help other people, but because she was in this trap where work does not pay, and so that's what we have to stop in this country, this madness, keeping our kids from going to college, from living above the poverty line, all of these things, and their policy
And the federal
issues.
government's role, in the time we have left, the federal government's role, real quick, yes or no? Should we tax those who you were saying are getting a special deal? Should we tax them at a higher rate?
So obviously, yes, on issues
Obviously,
of
yes. Obviously, yes.
carried interest.
No. Wait. First of all, I don't have anything against wealth whatsoever. But there's a lot of places in the tax code that, he mentioned carried interest. He's right. Look, there's a whole bunch of others. Look, we give special breaks to the oil industry.
Shouldn't do that.
They make record billions of dollars in profits. The marketplace has taken place over whatever the tax code should be. So I don't know if you use an offshore tax haven.
What, are you kidding me? How could you even ask me that?
It's public television. Neither do we. So the bottom line is, why don't we close the loopholes on offshore tax havens? Before we talk about anybody's individual rates, there are plenty places in the code to close and create prosperity.
And they want you to talk about it as a taxing the rich more. No, it's creating a fair tax code that works for us all. It's not about taxing one group more.
On that note,
loopholes.
I tried. I tried. On that note, I'm going to ask our live studio audience to say thank you to Senators Bob Menendez and Cory Booker. That was good, right? I got to do this. You ready? I do not have an offshore account, but we have partners. WNET, NJTV, our partners at New Jersey Advanced Media. Thank you again to John Schreiber and the folks at NJPAC and all the other folks, FIOS and everyone else who carried us. And by the way, thank you to all the underwriters. We have to thank those who fund us in public television. And I want to thank everyone who came here tonight to be a part of this very special broadcast. And finally, one more time, thank you to United States Senators Bob Menendez and Cory Booker. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone.
The preceding program has been a production of the CAUCUS Educational Corporation and NJTV in cooperation with 13 for WNET, WHYY, FIOS 1 News, and WBGO Jazz 88.3 FM. Funding for the new Congress, U.S. Senators Menendez and Booker. A conversation with Steve Adubato at NJPAC has been provided by Barnabas Health, Johnson & Johnson, New Jersey Institute of Technology, the New Jersey Education Association, Health Republic Insurance of New Jersey, PSE&G, and by the law firm of GIBBONS, P.C. Promotional support provided by Commerce Magazine and by NJ.com. Small news, big news, true Jersey.
I think at NJIT there are a lot of smart students.
I came to NJIT for mechanical engineering because within state it's one of probably the top 3 schools for engineering.
It sort of creates a friendly competition where you can learn from them.
It's a great academic school.
I feel I'm being challenged, but at the same time I love the classes I'm taking.
The atmosphere of being here is like being at an upstart company. It's that same kind of drive, that same kind of passion.